Hey guys, welcome back. For this video, I'm going to be reviewing the Too Faced Appley in Love palette. So this one comes in their metal packaging and it's got this kind of embossed finish on the front of the packaging. On the inside, there is a mirror and it does close with a magnet. This palette is scented. It is supposed to be a caramel apple scent, but what I get is more of like a generic sweet scent with a hint of cinnamon and an even more subtle hint of caramel. I would break down the finishes in this palette into three main ones. So in total there's 18 shades. So 9 of them are your regular mattes, 6 of them are sparkling shimmers, and 3 of them are more of like a satiny type of shimmer finish. So here's a close-up of what those shades look like inside the palette. The sparkling shimmers have a mixture of fine shimmer and larger sparkle, and they give off kind of a wash of sparkle when applied with a brush, and are slightly more opaque when applied with a fingertip, but are, mostly give off sparkling finish. The shimmers that are mostly made up of fine shimmer either have a satiny finish or a smoother kind of reflect to them and not so much a sparkle. The mattes are that type of feel where they have a buttery, very smooth, nice quality when you touch them with your fingertip, except for the dark red matte on the right side and the dark purple in the lower row. Those two are slightly drier to the touch, but they do still show up well on the lid. They just, I guess those pigments cause them to be formulated slightly differently. Sweet on You is a pale nude matte with subtle pink tones. On me, it looks pretty natural and it's just light enough to be a highlight. If you have a warmer undertone, it may pull a little bit pink, may not look as natural. The quality of this is excellent. It's similar to many of the other mattes in the palette, has excellent color payoff. It really covers up discoloration well and evens out the skin tone. Doesn't feel dry or powdery. Really nice quality. Sparkling Cider is a light pinky champagne with a sparkling shimmer finish. It has both fine shimmer and larger sparkle and goes on to the lid kind of like as a sheer wash if I apply it with a brush. And if I apply it with my fingertip, I can definitely get more opaque coverage, but it never is never truly a metallic full coverage color. It's always got some sheerness to it. Fallout with this one was it was kind of an acceptable amount. It wasn't a whole lot and it wasn't hard to clean up. Core Values is a medium warm pink with a matte finish. So this one is warmer on my skin tone than what it looks like in the pan. I thought this would be more of a true pink, but once I put it on the lid, it kind of looks a little bit more coral on me. When I blend it out, it definitely looks very warm. It has strong red undertones in it. This is another very nice matte, very good color payoff, very smooth, feels nice to the touch, has a nice even blend to it. Appley in Love is a true red shimmer. This one is warmer overall and has more of a satin shimmer finish. It doesn't have any large sparkle in it, but it does have a decent amount of reflect to it. It kind of has an interesting glow in the sheen. I can see both a cool red in it and as well as like an orangey kind of glow in that sheen. This one is an okay quality shadow in my opinion. I am able to get it to look nice on the lid, but it does take me a little bit of time to build it up. Once I get an initial layer of this patted on the lid, it's kind of hard to get it to continue to adhere to itself. But with some patience, I'm able to get it there. Pick Me is a light emerald green with a satin shimmer finish. So this one has a reflection similar to Appley in Love, It is a little bit less shiny and reflective than some of the other shimmers in the palette, and it is mostly made up of fine shimmer, but there is a little bit of larger sparkle in this one. It is a cooler toned green, and it was one of the drier and more crumbly shades as I was swatching it, so I wasn't so sure it was going to work well on the lid, but it ended up doing just fine. It has plenty of color payoff. It adhered well. It was easy to work with. Applesauce is a deeper brown with a matte finish. This one has red tones in it. It's just barely red toned. On me, it looks pretty neutral. And I feel that it looks a little bit cooler on the skin than it actually looks in the pan. I thought it was going to have a little bit more of a kind of orangey look to it, but it doesn't. It does blend out mostly fine by itself, but I prefer to use a transition shade with this just to get the very smoothest blend, but I can get away with skipping that if I really wanted to. It's a very nice quality matte. Smitten is a shimmery white with a sparkling finish and a slight pinkish hue to it. It looks just like a regular white here, but if I were to compare it to some other true white shimmers, it does have that very slight pinkish lean to it. This one goes on as a sheer wash of sparkle if I apply it with a brush, even if I try to build it up. If I use my fingertip to apply it, I can get something with more opacity that covers more of whatever color I have underneath it and just gives off a lot more of a reflection. The fallout with this one was a little bit more noticeable than some of the other shades that are in this finish, but I still don't think it was an excessive amount. Sweetie Pie is another sparkling shimmer. This one is a shifty shade, and it is one of two in the palette that does that. It goes from a light, cool-toned pink to more of a golden pink, depending on the angle of the light. It's not a very obvious shift, and it's definitely more visible in a swatch or in the pan, but I find it very difficult to notice on the eye. This one was a little bit sheerer than the other shades in this finish, and I definitely needed to apply it with my fingertip to get it to show up as best as possible. It also had some fallout, but I thought this one had less fallout than the other shades in this finish. Bite Me is a satin shade, and this one is also, it's not a shifty shade, actually. It's more of a duochrome. It does not shift in the light, but it has like a cooler toned pink base color, and then it has a lot of very fine golden shimmer particles, and I'm able to see both the pink and the gold simultaneously, which kind of gives it that appearance of being a duochrome while not actually shifting. It just kind of, you can see all those colors at once. This is probably the only shade in the palette that is exactly this finish. There are two others that are similar. So Appley and Love and Pick Me both also have a lot of fine shimmer and a little bit more of like a satiny finish compared to many of the other shimmers in the palette. But this one is like a true satin, and it's one of my favorite finishes that Too Faced does. I've seen some shades like this in their previous palettes, and it's just super gorgeous, just enough of a subtle reflect, but it's not too blinding and like too flashy. It's just very pretty. Caramel Apple is a light peachy brown with a matte finish. This shade is one that when I first opened the palette I thought could be a go-to crease transition shade, something I could use on a daily basis. But it is a little too warm for me on my skin tone to look very natural for daily wear. I feel like it still looks very nice and it's pretty. It's just it looks obviously warm against my skin tone. This is very nice quality, just like all of the mattes that I've swatched so far. There's two mattes in this palette that kind of behave a little bit differently than most of them, and I will get to those shortly, but this one is an excellent one. Apple of my eye is another sparkling shimmer, and this one is a pale yellow gold, or like a pale yellow champagne. This one had more color payoff than the other shades in this finish, but it was the same in the way that it applied, where I get like a sheer sparkly wash with the brush, and using my finger gives me a much more color payoff if I do it that way. I did notice with this shade it had quite a bit more fallout, not with the brush, but when I was using my finger. For some reason, I just got more fallout. I also noticed this shade was more messy in the pan than the other ones. I think possibly my palette came very slightly broken and maybe the shade was slightly damaged. That may be why I had that fallout. I don't know. Anyhow, I found that the fallout was not very difficult to clean up. It was pretty easy to brush away, even though there was more of it. Candy Apple is a cool toned matte red. This one is like almost like a burgundy or a cranberry red. It's definitely got like a pinkish tone to it, but it's very rich and it's got a lot of depth to it, so it's very nice. This one, Candy Apple, and another one called So Snackable in the bottom row. These two shades feel drier than the rest of the mattes. This one has very good color payoff. It's got more color payoff than So Snackable. It's a little bit more difficult to use and blend. It's a little more difficult to apply evenly than the mattes that I have swatched so far. I just need to give it a little bit more time and be a little more patient, but I'm able to get this shade to look nice on the lid. It does help to use a transition shade with this or to layer it over a lighter shade. That does give it a much smoother appearance. I do like this one, even though it does feel a little bit drier. I feel like this one performs fine. But the other one, So Snackable, not a super fan of that one. Crunch Time is a medium bronzy yellow with a sparkling shimmer finish. This one was one of the better shades of this finish, one that had more pigmentation than the rest. It was a little bit more chunky also to the touch and seemed to have more of that larger sparkle in it. Not by a whole lot, but just a little bit of something I noticed. That said, it didn't have any more fallout. I felt like this shade actually had a little bit less fallout than some of the other shades like this. And it was pretty easy to apply with a brush, and I got a little bit more color payoff with my finger, but I didn't feel the need to actually do that to get a nice level of pigmentation out of this. Turnover is a medium mustard yellow. This one has a nice amount of depth to it. It is definitely a yellow and not orange, but I like that it doesn't scream super bright or in your face. It actually has a nice tone to it where it works well as a transition shade like I have it here. I can also layer it on pretty heavily with a flat brush, and I really like the color that it comes out to be if I do that. It looks a little bit richer, a little bit deeper, but still very yellow. This was one of the better mattes in the palette. It was a lot like the lighter mattes with super even color payoff, very nice to the touch, very easy to blend, very smooth. So Snackable is a deep muted purple that's a little bit warmer in tone than what I expected based on how it looks in the pan. It looks similar to Candy Apple in the middle row, but it is definitely more purple. This one is my least favorite one, or the least favorite matte, and probably my least favorite shade in general out of the whole palette because it is the most difficult to apply. I have to spend quite a bit of time kind of patting it, using different brushes, really spending time blending to make it look even. And by the end of it, it looks almost satisfying, but I'm still just not thrilled with this shade. It does work and it adds a nice color, but it is not my favorite one. Slice Slice Baby is a duochrome light green shimmer. This one is a sparkling shimmer, but the sparkles in this one are smaller in size than for the rest of the sparkling shimmers. So the finish is just slightly different than it is for those ones. It is definitely not a satin or a metallic though, and it is sheerer than the other shades in this palette. It's probably the sheerest shimmer in here. Even if I layer it on pretty heavily with my fingertip, it still doesn't ever look opaque. It's still pretty, it's just not quite what I was expecting based on how all the other ones worked on me. The shift in this is also not super obvious. It's visible in a swatch or in the pan, but on the eye I really don't notice it at all. Orchard Stroll is a medium orangey brown with a matte finish. This one is not too far off in tone from Turnover, that mustard yellow that I swatched earlier, but this is definitely deeper, more brown, even more orangey I would say. This is also a very nice matte, just like most of the others. I think all of the light and medium depth shades in this palette are super nice. This one blends really easily. I left that little clip that shows me putting a splotch on my lid there just so you could see how easy it blends itself out. Good color payoff, looks really even, feels really nice to the touch. It's not a dry shade, not much fallout. Baskets Full is a very deep, cool-toned brown with a matte finish. This one is definitely cooler toned than I expected. I thought it would be warm like all the other browns in this palette. And most of the time, deep browns that I find are warmer, but this is cooler. It has a lot of color payoff. This was surprisingly rich in pigmentation. It was almost opaque in just a single pass on my arm there. And I didn't have a hard time covering the lid with this one. It doesn't look the most even here on the lid. I would not use a color like this by itself normally. And there are shades like this that can be used by themselves. So this isn't like the most even deep shade ever, but it is pretty nice and does have that surprising level of color payoff to it. And then I will wrap this up with some comparison palettes. So first up we have the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 3 palette, Too Faced The Naturally Nudes palette, Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette, Too Faced Italian Spritz palette, ABH Nouveau palette, ABH Rose Metals palette, and finally the Urban Decay Wild Greens palette. Okay guys, so that's going to do it for this video. Here are all the swatches together so you can get a better idea of what it all looks like. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me until the very end here. I know this was a very long video. I wanted to try doing the long format reviews that I used to do again and see how I felt about it. I'm not so sure I want to keep doing this unless you guys really find it all that helpful. It is kind of tedious to do, and I'm sure it is kind of tedious to listen to as well. I am looking forward to actually doing some tutorials with this palette. I think that's a little bit more fun probably for everyone involved. Alright, again, thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one.